For Krima Media's Polity, I'm Tabi Shomulikai. Award-winning creative writer and anthropologist Casey Golomski joins me to unpack his book titled God's Waiting Room: Racial Reckoning at Life's End. Welcome, Professor Golomski.
Thank you very much.
So, in trying to get answers on how to achieve greater equality in South Africa's healthcare sector, you undertook a trip to an old age home, which you call Grace in the book, which is in Mpumalanga. So can you tell us more about some of the tensions between care and prejudice that you uncovered in your tour at Grace?
Long-term care settings like Grace and other old age homes in the US and South Africa are necessary spaces for families to provide or find support for their older relatives or people who live with disabilities and need long-term care. So it's not just older adults in an old age home it's often adults who have long-term care needs around their disabilities. In post-apartheid Africa, places are supposed to be race-blind with admissions, but sometimes it is those who can afford to pay for their stay because homes do not have enough subsidies from the South African government to fully cover the cost of living for some residents. So there is an accessibility issue. And sometimes, because places might be historically founded by like an Afrikaner women's charity, they might preference people who speak Afrikaans, not outrightly, but it may be more comfortable for an older adult who speaks Afrikaans to live there rather than somebody who speaks Zulu primarily.
And talk to us more about your interest in the end of life and where the fascination came from.
Well, I'm an anthropologist, so I'm very interested in what it means to be human and all the messy, strange things we do and the experiences that we all share regardless of culture. So all humans are born, many fall in love, many will have children or find significant relationships, and we will all age and die physically. But how that process unfolds and what it means to people and how we relate and care for each other can vary quite significantly depending on culture and community. So it's a question about being human, but how that plays out looks different in different places like the US versus South Africa.
And also, Professor Golomski, you write that it was from Angel, referring to the home's manager, that you learned the phrase God's waiting room and that you found it compelling. So can you tell us more on this?
I think when people face the end of life, they are searching for answers to existential questions. What has happened to me? What will happen to me next? How have I lived my life? What will happen to my family that I leave behind? And a place like an old age home brings those questions to the fore, as well as one's own individual experience of aging. Many people that I met in this study were variably Christian to certain degrees. They also had, some interesting perspectives on the afterlife and ghosts and ancestors too that reflect their cultural heritage. But this particular space of reflection and anticipation for death, the next kind of phase of one's life, lent itself to some of these staff members like Angel calling this God's waiting room.
And you also explore themes such as racism, ageism, and sexism. So can you briefly tell us how these factors play out in an old age setting?
So you might say ageism in an old age home. What does that mean? Ageism is discrimination or prejudice based on ideas about somebody's age. And that could be, young people are just crazy and don't do what they're told. Or old people, they're from a different generation and maybe they're inherently racist. Nursing, of course, and especially geriatric nursing, that is the science that people learn to care for older adults. Nurses learn to treat people with respect and attend to their specific needs related to aging, but sometimes the prejudices of what we believe an old person is or wants creeps in. So because this was a primarily Afrikaner home, they often would tack the little keys at the end of names. So Tabi Key or Casey Key, kind of diminutive, it's a diminutive or making older people seem like they're babies in a way. right? Like, oh, older people might not be able to remember as well if they live with dementia-related changes, leading sometimes staff or others to characterize older people as childlike. So that's a way that ageism might creep into an old age home setting. Another factor we might see is sexism or gender-related prejudices in old age around sexuality. So in the book, I explore different unique individuals. One chapter features Andrew, who married his husband under apartheid, which we know was illegal. But when he and his husband moved into the old age home, most of the people in the home are widowed heterosexual women, and Andrew felt for his safety and identity, it was better for him to go back into the closet, so to speak, and not celebrate or identify as a gay man. So these spaces might shape how people are able to express their gender or sexual identity too.
And talk to us more about whether you found the style of writing, the one that you adopted in your book, where the story moves from one room to another in a short period of time, to be challenging.
It was a very exciting way to write a book, and I think one that readers will enjoy much more than a conventional academic book. So, social science research, I will tell you what happened, these are the variables. This book rather focuses on life lessons by listening to people's stories and getting up close and personal with both the residents of the home and the staff of the home. So we hear both perspectives on what they thought about life, the end of life, and how they got along with each other. The book takes place in a single day, even if it's based on 7 years of research, where readers move room to room to meet one of these very unique individuals, like Andrew, who's someone who went back into the closet, Bethel, who is an intersex or trans caregiver, Yvonne, who fought against the War of Liberation in Zimbabwe, and Nolene, who was Nelson Mandela's Robben Island prison nurse.
Talking about Nolene, what are some of the experiences that she shared with you?
Yeah, it was quite a surprise to meet someone of such historical significance like this woman who worked as one of the head nurses in the home. So she had a very storied but secret career, kind of out of the public eye, as the first sister of rank to work under correctional services at Robben Island Prison. And this woman is not featured in any of the biographies of Nelson Mandela or other political prisoners at the island, but through my research with the Nelson Mandela Foundation and consultation with another famous person from Robben Island, Christo Brand, I was able to verify that she and her family lived on the island for many years. And she shared some interesting experiences of friendship with the political prisoners, not wishing to learn or know too much about the political situation, but wanting to meet people on a humanistic level as a care provider, and sharing some very troubling stories of taking care of people under very, very difficult, if not violent, conditions. Prison nursing is kind of an oxymoron, because prison is a place that, even if it's meant to rehabilitate people, it really takes a toll and a pain on people's bodies. But then we have somebody who's supposed to keep them alive under very difficult conditions. So there's quite a contradiction in that role. But she was quite beloved by many of the staff members and the residents in the home.
And how would you compare such healthcare settings in South Africa and in the US?
In the US, depending on its location and setup, some homes have much more government subsidy under Medicaid, Medicare programming. Old age homes, or what we call nursing homes, there are many, many more in the US than there are in South Africa. So tens of millions of older adults live in some kind of long-term care setting compared to South Africa. There is a degree of perhaps not racial segregation, but racially distinct homes. So in the book here, I focus on Grace, which is a majority white home, and also contrast it to Security, which is a majority black home. In the US, you find kind of similar dynamics where homes that are majority subsidized through Medicare, Medicaid might also be majority black, and depending on where they are, maybe in the South, so there are regional variations too as to how the racial dynamic plays out in homes in the US. Yeah.
And lastly, Professor Golomski, what are you hoping people will take away after reading your book?
One of the big takeaways in the book is the notion of grace and how grace is very important. The caregivers and the residents in the home are very different people on paper. We have the nurses who are primarily Black and members of the born free generation, and the older adult residents who are primarily a generation that represents the era of apartheid. And so these groups of people have been historically primed to not be friends so much. But when they both find themselves in an out-of-the-way place, like Grace, one that's often invisible to us in a broader picture of not only our healthcare sector, but society as a whole, people make some very profound and powerful relationships with each other. Something that is like friendship, maybe something that's like the exchange of love in a way, that I do care for you and I do wish for you to be better and I wish for you to thrive in your job. But sometimes these are very difficult relationships too. Older adults refusing care or because of dementia-related changes making racist remarks to staff members, and staff members saying, I don't wish to deal with this. But grace was a fundamental notion I saw where people could, for a time, accept their situation, accept that another person may not be able to change their situation, or accept the fact that this may not be for me and it's time to move on to another job or role. So grace is a very powerful thing that I think we can all adopt in our lives and decide whether we give it to ourselves or other people to go on living.
That was Casey Golomski speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about God's waiting room.